So we're in the sugya right now in the middle of Bekuach Nefesh, Sakonis Nefashos. As we started yesterday, this Gavaldige sugya. Yesterday we mentioned one Lashon from the Yerushalmi. We have to move on with another Lashon of the Yerushalmi. There's another Lashon from the Heilige Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that when it comes to Bekuach Nefesh, when it comes to Sakonis Nefashos, as we're dealing with today, if a person asks a kasha, Hashoyel. So yesterday we said Harizemeguna, which is the Lashon of the Yerushalmi, which is just disgusting to ask. He goes a step further, Yerushalmi, and he says not only is it disgusting, is Harizemeguna, Harizeh Sheifech Domim. As though it's the Lashon of the Yerushalmi. That means the Yerushalmi is telling us that if a person has a question when it comes to Pekuach Nefesh, what do I do? Am I Machal Shabbos, not Machal Shabbos? You ask a Rav Shaila, you're spilling blood. Why? Because in the meantime, who knows what's going to happen with that fellow? Now again, of course, the Yerushalmi is discussing a situation where you cannot wait, and where waiting could be detrimental to the person's health. But in a situation where you can wait, and things could be done in the correct and calm manner, of course, then even the Yerushalmi Maskim, that's what you should do. For example, one of the examples which is very common is a woman giving birth on Shabbos. A woman giving birth on Shabbos, again, depending on the situation, can sometimes done calmly, with a shinoi, maybe even through a goy, maybe even in different ways. You don't necessarily have to be in a situation where, what do we do? Quickly call an ambulance. Sometimes it will be that way. But to know that there are differences even within the sugya of Bekuach Nefesh. Now yesterday we started with the introduction, and we went through 7 reasons why it's mutter, which the Gemara in Yuma tells us. 7 reasons why the Torah was matir, a person to be Machal Shabbos. And by the way, when we say to be Machal Shabbos, it means everything's mutter. Not only Chilul Shabbos, but anything that needs to be done is mutter, of course, with the exception of the Gimel Averas Chamuros, that's Avada not. But al Kaponim, every other Avera could be mutter if it's going to save and help somebody save their life. So we spoke about the reasons, and one of the reasons we said was V'chai Bohem. The Torah wants you to live by the Torah, not to die. V'chai Bohem v'lo shiyamus behem. V'shomu v'nei Yisrael es Shabbos, right? We want you to keep Shabbos, and if we have to machal one Shabbos, kedei, in order that you'll keep many more Shabbos, and that's fine. That's gavaldik. So that's going to lead us to the following few shilas of today. And that is like this. What happens if someone is what we call in Lashon Chazal, a chaye shah? That means he's not going to live for very long. There is no shaila. The person is going to die soon, but we can prolong that. We can hopefully extend their life, maybe even for a few minutes, a few hours, hopefully a few days, months, years, and move on from there, right? We don't know. So the halacha is that even though he may die, for example, if one of the reasons why it's mutter to Machal Shabbos is because he'll keep the next Shabbos, what if he's going to die before Tuesday? And therefore there's no shaila that he's not going to make it till the next Shabbos. The answer is Chayishah, Avada, we are Machal Shabbos without any shaila whatsoever. We're Machal Shabbos to go along and prolong somebody's life in that case. That is a Dover Poshet Ad Ma'oid. The Shulchan Aruch goes in Shulchan Test, which we're not going to go into now, but it is very, unfortunately, Nageir in Turkey, for example, where you've got a situation where there's rubble and you don't know if anyone's there. And you have a suffix if they're there, you have a suffix if there's a yid, you have a suffix if they're alive, suffix after suffix after suffix, and yet you can still be Machal Shabbos. We'll talk about suffix in a moment. Next question. If we're saying that one of the reasons why we want a person to Machal Shabbos, to keep somebody alive, is because he's going to keep more Shabbosim, or because he's going to keep the Torah, V'chai Bohem, live by the Torah, don't die by the Torah. So then what happens if the guy's an Eina Bardas? For example, let's say he fell so badly, there was no shaila, he may be alive, but he will never talk or speak, or he's not going to be a normal person. Right? He's not a normal person in that case. What's the halacha if someone is never really going to wake up, is going to be a vegetable, for example, for the rest of his life? So therefore there's no real toyeles, right? Bocha Rebbe, the Gemara tells us, right? Yesh koina aloma b'sha'achas. That means a person can be koina his whole olam haba b'sha'achas. With Desta Mechtameliyahu, there's a whole shtickle Torah on this. But al kaponim, you know what this means? This means like this, that even if you're saving a person who's going to be a vegetable, Rahman al-Islam, for the rest of his life, he's never going to talk, he's never going to put on tefillin, he's never going to keep Shabbos in a physical way, you have to Machal Shabbos. There's no shaila. You absolutely have to Machal Shabbos. I was involved with a case quite a few years ago where somebody was here in Eretz Yisrael, they were Bal Tshuva, and they were alone from here in Eretz Yisrael by themselves. Their family lived in England, and if I remember correctly, I think it was the man's mother was in a vegetable state in the hospital. Mamish, just like a vegetable, no shaykhs to anything, no recovery. They were just like waiting for the end. And this man's sister called him up on a Friday, Erev Shabbos, and said, "I'm just letting you know that I'm going to the hospital tonight, Friday night, or Shabbos morning, whatever it was, Saturday morning, she wasn't religious, and I'm going to tell them to pull the plug, because this is ridiculous, it's costing us too much money, we cannot have her in the hospital anymore, there's no reason, she's not living anyway, what quality of life is this, we have to save beds for younger people, all of these stupid svaras that they say in these situations." So this man called up a rabbi, and the rabbi said, "Get on a plane on Shabbos Kodesh and go and sort out the situation. Since you're one of the kids, you're one of the siblings, you have the right to say no, and they will listen to you. Whatever, every situation is different. You have to know." And he told, get on a plane on Shabbos. Do whatever you have to do to get there. To say that person's never really going to wake up. His mother was never going to wake up. Not going to keep Shabbos. Not going to make brachos. Not going to do anything. It's not the point. Just to keep someone alive. Yesh koino ilama b'sha'achas. By the way, just a b'derech agav, it shows us how choshev life is, even if a person can't do anything. The very fact that we can think, right? The whole chovis halavavos is mamish full of this. Chovis halavavos, what can we do with our brains? What can we do with our hearts? Even if we're not physically, maybe doing something, but we can accomplish so much even without that. Yes?
What if the person can't even think?
Irrelevant. We don't know what's going on. There are many studies that were done where the doctors thought that they could not think, and there was some movement in the brain, and you don't know what's going on. You don't know what tikkun they needed in the world. You don't know also, it's not our cheshbon to make things. Again, Rabbi said we're not passing over here shilas about pulling the plug, not pulling the plug. That's not what we're getting into. The point is to be Mechal Shabbos in every situation. Yeah.
But if you do pull the plug, are you like?
I don't want to get involved in pulling the plug, Rabbi say, because it's very complicated and it's not our sugya. Our sugya is to be Mechal Shabbos to save somebody's life. Is it mamish nagei this guy? A lot to get to. Yeah. We'll talk about that. Now, let's move on, Rabbi say. For example, we can be Machal Shabbos for a baby of a few hours old. We have no idea what's going to happen. Are they going to make it or not going to make it? What about a pregnant woman, for example, that feels that the baby has stopped moving? By the way, Rabbi, I'll give you an Eitzah Tova. So remember, if a woman ever feels that the fetus, that the baby is stopping to move, she should drink some orange juice or something sugary, wait 10 minutes, generally you'll feel movement. If you don't feel movement, you can call a doctor on Shabbos. You can even be Machal Shabbos for such a case. That's a Dava Poshet Ad Mo'oid. Let's move on, Rabbi said, to a few more situations. The Olam asked the Kasha, what about a goy? If the whole reason to Machal Shabbos, for a Yid to be Machal Shabbos, so Choshev Shabbos Kodesh is in order that we will keep Shabbos, or that person will keep Shabbos, or the Makam the mitzvahs, what about a goy? Can we Machal Shabbos for a goy? So the Mishnah Yuma tells us clearly, the Mishnah Yuma says no. We are not Machal al Shabbos for a goy. Now, the problem is, the poskim saying, the Gemara already talks about it, that Mishum Eva means that if the goyim find out that the Yidden are not Machal Shabbos, then you know what that will cause? That will cause terrible situations. Mimela, Zugt alle poskim, again, Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Moshe, Yosef, Chacham Ovadia, and others, that nowadays, especially with social media, the news, and everything being distributed and sent around the world, 100% we are Machal Shabbos for a goy without thinking twice. Of course, this is not now to discuss if a person wants to become a doctor. We have 2 Talmidim of this yeshiva that are on their way to become a doctor, Be'ezus Hashem, and the shaila is what happens if you could take a shift on Shabbos with goyim. That's already a different shaila. But I'm talking about if a person's involved, he's on the street and he sees something happens with goyim, or he's a Hatzalah member, or whatever it may be. So of course we are Machal Shabbos for a goy. What about a mumar? What about someone that's a yid but not Mekayim Torah mitzvahs? Lahachis bedafka. I don't want to keep the Torah and mitzvahs chas v'shalom. So there's a Pri Megadim. Well, the Pri Megadim says very clearly over here in Shin Chav Ches that we're not allowed to Machal Shabbos for a mumma. However, the Chazon Ish famously writes, and again, I don't want to go too much into every detail of it because we could spend weeks just discussing each point. The Chazon Ish says that most of the Yidden out there in the world are what we call a Tinnik Shenishba. Tinnik Shenishba means that they were a child that were kidnapped, and therefore, even though they were not physically kidnapped, but they don't understand the beauty of what it means, Yiddishkeit, Shabbos Kodesh, of Tefillah, of having a Shaykhas to Rabbeinu Shalom, of everything else together with that. Zuk the Chazon Ish, unless you sat there with this Yid and explained to him and gave him the patience and the time and the beauty of what Yiddishkeit is, which most people don't do and they never heard. All they heard is in the news what, some Hafkanah is doing on the street, whatever it is, and there's people over there, look what they're doing. Unfortunately, that's the Metzias. They see that sometimes, and that's their impression, right? So they're called the Tinik Shenishba. The Melech Zuk the Chazanish and Ala Poiskim. Of course, we can, Mi Machal Shabbos, for someone that is not keeping Shabbos. Again, like I said yesterday, the famous story of a guy, Chassidish guy that had to get on his Zatzala bike, went over there to go, for some guy that went on a motorbike accident on Shabbos morning, and the guy looks at him and says, "You Machal Shabbos for me." Boom, the next week there he was with the Kali Pies, with the Strammel already. It was Gavaldi. But Al Kaponim, moving on. Machal Shabbos for a baby in any stage, even though there are different stages in Chazal and Shulchan Aruch of a baby, whether or not a baby's got a din of going to live or not. Nowadays, Shlomo Zalman, we have incubators, we have beautiful, Baruch Hashem, medical advances that are able to save babies at a very young age, even in the 7th month, by Mavin Yovin. Therefore, we are allowed to Machal Shabbos for any age of a child, even if there's a suffix that the child will live or anything similar to that. What if a person, Rahman al-Itzlan, tried to commit suicide and was not successful, and now they're in a situation of a choyle sheyesh basakana. They're in very bad danger because of either what they took or what they did to themselves. They didn't manage to kill themselves, but they did manage to harm themselves in a terrible, terrible way. The poskim discuss at length whether a person is allowed to be machalal Shabbos for such a person that put themselves in that situation. Zukt alle poskim kemat that it's mutter. Even though there are those who are machmeh, but the poskim say about it's mutter, especially as nowadays we say that a person that is in that situation is probably not thinking straight, probably has some issues, whatever it may be, and Memele is not a healthy person. Of course, we have to help him because he doesn't understand fully the ramifications of many of his actions in that way. Let us move on, Rabbi Sai, to a different shaylas over here, and that is a choyle sheyesh. Yeah.
If you're a regular person, an average person, how do you know to decipher if it's life or death?
Beautiful question. Beautiful question. How do you know let's take a regular perspective. Dovi's asking if we're not a Hatzalah member, if we're not a doctor, if we're not trained, how do we know if something is a Pekuach Nefesh situation that requires Chilul Shabbos in any way? So, number one, I want to give you two answers. Number one, we have to know that the din of a Sofik Pekuach Nefesh means it's Pekuach Nefesh. Which means, if we even have a suffix that this is a life-threatening illness, that this person may die, again, we're not discussing a chodesh sha'im b'sakana, we're not even discussing sakonas eva, that he loses eva. We've discussed this previously. We're discussing now, it's a suffix that this person may die, or this will cause him to die in some way soon. Suffix b'kuach nefesh lahakol, which means, even if we'll keep him alive for a bit longer, or we'll save his life, 100% we should be machal Shabbos. That is a psak klon shulchan aruch, like Shlomo Zalman said. What do I do? Shlomo Zalman said, add the same suffix. When is it Pekuach Nefesh? So he said, if it's something that most people would run for, then run. And do whatever you have to do. Call an ambulance, do whatever has to be done. Now what I want to give you, which I think is the second answer to your beautiful question, is I want to give you a few examples of what is considered to be Pekuach Nefesh. I'm not saying these are the only examples, but this is important, Rabbi said, to listen to, because this is a list of a partial list of what is considered to be a for sure Sakonos Nefashos, or at least a suffix Sakonos Nefashos that will be allowed to be Machal Shabbos. Okay? Let me give you a few examples. Signs of a heart attack or a stroke. A woman giving birth, obviously. Persistent high temperature. Persistent, not just a one-time thing, and not because we know what the person is sick, because before Shabbos we called the doctor and the doctor said it's okay, they have the flu, they have strep, whatever it may be, and therefore it's high temperatures to be understood. When it's not understood, or when it comes with other symptoms, persistent high temperature is a sakonis nefashos. A person could be machal Shabbos. You may ask, what does it mean, high temperature? So let me just give you again a few gedorim that the gedorim bring us. Reb Moshe brings, even though the Tzitz Eliezer has a kash on him, Reb Moshe brings a chelik Alas to Mekuf Chav Tes, he says 102 Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what that is in Celsius, but 102 Fahrenheit is at least a sophic Sakonos Tofoshes. Ravosna, Rafalk told me this as well. Rafalk Zatzal told me, which is better in the sheet of Ravosna and Rav Nissim Karelitz, that they hold 104 in that case. Rabbi Zul Obach told me Lamaiser 105. Chacham Ben Tzina Bashaul and Olet Zion writes 102. But again, this is all depending on the situation. Also depends if it's an elderly person or if it's a young baby or a child. Obviously, a young baby with high temperature, especially a newborn baby, any height in temperature could be very dangerous. Call an ambulance, call a doctor. That's a davar pashut. After 3 months, generally it gets a little bit easier. But for sure, a newborn baby, for sure, is going to be any high temperature could be a problem. A young child, for sure. An adult, again, depending on the situation, depending where he's holding before that, you'll know what's going on. An injury to the eye that we mentioned previously, because the eye and the heart are connected, so it's a bad injury to the eye, is at least a suffix sarconosophoshes, appendicitis, a person that's got diabetes and has an attack, pneumonia, if a child swallowed an object, right, that's a davar pashut ad ma'od. Major blood vessels that had been cut, right, the wrist, back of the hand, there's heavy bleeding, Pekuach nefesh. A person faints and is still unconscious. Normally you could feed them a little bit of water, sugar water or something, you can get it going, put the feet up, whatever. I'm not going to go, this is not a first aid course, this is not a CPR situation, but just to realize the person is continuing to be unconscious, that is at least a sofer Pekuach nefesh. Meningitis, food poisoning, right, negate to children that, open up the closet, open up the cupboard, the drawer, that have, very many detergents and bleaches and St. Moritz and all these things. Rahman al-Islam. This is for sure a shayla pekuach nefesh. Severe burns, internal bleeding. Sometimes you have a child that falls from a height, let's say on a bunk bed, and you have a child that falls down as continuing to cry. There could be internal bleeding going on. Even if they look good, there could be internal bleeding. That could be a problem in that case over there. A person has to realize any injury of an internal organ, heart, lungs, kidneys, stomach, and all these things, unless you know otherwise, is yes considered to be a pekuach nefesh situation. A very, very deep cut, right, that's under the tissue, and it's at least a suffix pekuach nefesh, especially because it could get infected. A splinter or a thorn that is between the skin and the fingernail. We mentioned this, right? A splinter or thorn that is between the nail and the skin of the fingernail could be a mamish, a pekuach nefesh situation in that case over there. Animal bites. Anyone that gets bitten by an animal could lead to all sorts of illnesses. Scorpion, wild dogs, it could be also horses and donkeys. By the way, a human bite is the same thing. If a person is bitten by a human being and it pierces the skin, actually pierces the skin, it's quite unusual, but if it does pierce the skin, that could cause serious infection in the blood. That is pekuach nefesh. Call an ambulance in that case. A bone fracture, we spoke about the thigh bone, or an open fracture as well, a heat stroke or sunstroke, and depending on situations. Now, Rabbi said there's a lot more to discuss, but one of the things I'd like to discuss is Shaila in the Gemara, which is pekuach nefesh on Shabbos. Is it hutra or is it tchuya? That means, is it hutra, meaning it's like a Wednesday, do whatever you want, put on the air conditioning, put the music, whatever? Or is it d'chuya, that means it's still Shabbos, but they pushed it over for pekuach nefesh, and therefore I do have to be careful how I am mechal Shabbos. In Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, we'll go through those halachas. Have a wonderful day.